Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. So today we've got another solo episode, and I've always promised people to have a second episode in the week, but usually they don't turn out that way. But this week is different. There's so much news going on, and I expect there's going to be a lot of big events next week. I think the Chauvin trial is going to wrap up, so there's going to be a lot to talk about next week, and the things I want to talk about today may no longer be in the news. So I decided to do a second episode. A couple quick things. First off, some of the people were remarking that I sounded dejected and sad and downbeat in the last episode. I assure you that I was 100% white-pilled, 100% positive, just recording in a new setting. Wasn't trying to shout as much as before, but I realized that I have to really shout to ensure my listeners think that I'm upbeat and totally white-pilled. So no dejected or anything like that. If I still sound downbeat or whatever, just let me know. I am recording a new setting, so we are trying out different things. So that's the one. Housekeeping item. I guess that would be a housekeeping item. Second thing is, on that last episode, I talked about Tucker Carlson and how he is irreplaceable, is that we have nobody else like Tucker. Tucker is moving the ball forward. He's advancing our cause in the mainstream like no one else right now. And sure enough, later that night, he proved me right. He had an incredible monologue about the ADL, about his demographic change comments, and about how everyone is lying about him and they're hypocritical. And it's absolutely right. That monologue he did Monday night, every time we were like saying like this is the most important thing Tucker has done, whether it is, him attacking the military industrial complex, him mentioning South Africa, or there are so many even questioning free market orthodoxy. There are so many things that every time like, okay, this is the best Tucker segment ever. That segment was the best Tucker segment ever. That was incredibly brave and bold, and moved the conversation exactly in our direction. He talked about how California was completely changed, going from the nicest state in the union to the worst state in the union, thanks to mass immigration. Most importantly, he called out the ADL. He did not back down the ADL. Most people, when they're attacked by the ADL, are like, oh, no, I'm not anti-Semitic. We love the ADL. No, he instead brought up a blog post published by the ADL criticizing demographic replacement and making the same points Tucker said that it got him in hot water last week. But it was about Israel. He said that ADL said that if you fundamentally change the people of Israel, Israel will no longer be a Jewish national state. And he simply just pointed this out. And it's like, well, the ADL is attacking me for making the same comments. What's wrong with that? Why can't we make the same argument about America? ADL got very silent about that. And even a lot of former people associated with the ADL, Abe Foxman, and apparently a bunch of rabbis attacked the ADL for criticizing Tucker. So, I mean, he stood up to the ADL, and instead of capitulating or backing down, he called them out, and he won this fight. He's staying on the air, and there's all these liberal outlets who are now complaining that Tucker can do whatever he wants. I saw the New Republic was whining about that, and it's pretty awesome that he can. So he won this fight. I think a lot of the people on the right who were criticizing before overnight became very pro Tucker because they realized that he's doing so much important work with the show. And no one else is making these same arguments or having these same discussions. So I think it's good to be proven right in the same day you make your arguments and so quickly. But I hope, and if you have not watched Tucker's segment, I strongly encourage you to watch. I think it's it's pretty long. I think it's at least 15 minutes. So I encourage you to watch all 15 minutes of it. It is one of the most engaging things that cable news has ever produced, and it is probably the best thing that Fox News has ever produced, and certainly the best Tucker Carlson segment. And I think it's really moving the ball forward. And I think also, most importantly, apparently some Republicans watched it, as at least two lawmakers echoed Tucker's opinion later on this week. Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, I believe, he talked about demographic replacement in a subcommittee hearing. Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who has suddenly turned himself into like one of the most based senators out there, which you wouldn't have expected this before based on his past behavior. said in a Fox News interview that the Democrats want open borders so they can fundamentally change this country, so they have permanent power, fully echoing Tucker's opinion and what he said in his segments. And so it appears that this message that Tucker's having is having influence in the halls of power and making a difference. So once again, we support Tucker. Tucker is the central figure now without Trump constantly in the picture. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now moving on to other topics. Now the topic that made me do an episode today, because I was so, worked up about it when I'm reading about this story, is the case of a South Carolina drill instructor who was arrested for confronting a suspicious black man in his neighborhood. Of course, another viral video. In the video, we see this man confront the black individual. He demands to know why he's in the neighborhood. The black guy is sketchy, isn't giving any answers, isn't moving. And the worst thing this guy does is that he yells at him and gets in his face and tells him to leave his neighborhood, and he pushes him. And it's not like he doesn't push him on the ground. It's not really this is not the vicious assault, and people are trying to claim that this is like one of the worst lynchings we've ever seen. Not necessarily the case. He just gives him a shove. Of course, you're not supposed to do that, but whatever. Like if you've not been an adult male and been shoved by another adult male, I don't know what life you've been living. But I mean, these are just things that happen. But apparently, this is one of the worst things that people have ever seen. And this drill sergeant, Sergeant Jonathan Pentland, was arrested over the clip, and then a black mob formed around his house and were threatening him and were demanding that he come out. And there was even like tweets going on about like saying "fuck around and find out." So they're making all types of threats towards this individual, and he had to flee from his home. Even though not only was he arrested, he was suspended by the Army. The Army condemned him. The sheriff of the county, I think Richland County, said that we will not tolerate any bullies, and this is bullying behavior, and we'll show you what it's like when we'll hit back harder if you bully people. And so narrative has already been implanted in the minds that this like evil racist Army sergeant bullied this poor little innocent black individual who was doing nothing wrong and was just walking around the neighborhood. He was walking while black, as they say. And of course, as the case with all these stories, that's not necessarily what happened here. First off, Pentland came out and confronted this guy because this woman, and this was said to a local news camera crew by one of the black individuals who was in the mob surrounding Pentland's home. And this is like a cookie cutter suburban area. This isn't necessarily the hood or anything like that. I mean, this could be, a little bit rougher area than what the optics suggest or what the setting suggests. But this is like what you would think of as a generic American suburban neighborhood. And there's a black mob surrounding this guy's house. And one of these guys told a TV cameraman, and he was totally dubious of the story. He didn't believe it, but he's like, they said this girl was walking around and this black guy, he, grabbed her and like began chasing her and stuff. And this girl like was knocking on all the doors. And like this guy totally disbelieved the white girl story. He believed that she was just making it up and, like she was just doing this for attention. But apparently several neighbors reported also that there was some type of assault going on that was being committed by this young black man. And the one person who came out to help her was Pentland, because he's a drill instructor. He's he's a Chad, you would say, and he's a masculine dude who you would want to turn to in a situation like that. And in that situation, if you watch from the video, he is trying his best not to escalate it because he knows he can get in trouble and he can totally fuck this guy up, the black guy who's confronting. And he chooses not to do that. He just intimidates him, tries to get in his face, tries to make sure that he leaves the neighborhood and leaves this woman alone who is claiming that he was assaulting him. And, if it was really bad video, we would have seen much worse assault than a simple shove. Well, and this guy, and the black guy in this case, also has a record of doing similar things. Just in the last week, there's a report from a police report, mind you, from April 8th saying that he grabbed a woman around her waist and partially pulled down her pants and was like
essentially what would be constituted as sexual assault. And then 2 days later, he tried to run off with a baby, with somebody's baby. He asked to hold a baby, and he tried to run off with it. And so this guy is constantly menacing the neighborhood in just a 1 week time frame. And Jonathan Pentland decided to put a stop to it and say, like, we're not going to tolerate this. And he's sent to jail, and his whole life is ruined. And the Washington Post, which reported on the guy's past assaults, said that, like, oh, well, he has an underlying medical condition that's making him do this. So you're just supposed to tolerate, which I don't think anyone, if you watch the video, you wouldn't realize that this guy has an underlying medical condition. I mean, he looks like a shifty character, but you wouldn't see, you wouldn't notice that he has an underlying medical condition. But you're supposed to know that. You're supposed to see, oh, this like poor little innocent fellow, he's just, working hard. He's just walking around doing nothing wrong. He can't help when he assaults women. He can't help when he does this. And, these are the same people who are, wanting to say, oh, you have to tolerate him pulling down young girls' pants in the middle of your neighborhood, are the same people who get outraged if their coworker asks them out on a date, and that's sexual assault and sexual harassment. But, if it's a black person doing this to a white neighborhood, you're just supposed to tolerate it, because that could be the next Emmett Till. They made the same argument against Emmett Till, and you don't want to be one of the people who lynched Emmett Till, do you? And so they make this argument constantly. And I think one of the things that is there's a lot going on here, as I like to say. But I think one of the big things to take away is this results in, or what this is a part of, is the criminalization of being a good neighbor, of noticing things. And that's what ultimately Jonathan Pentland is guilty of. One of the benefits of having a strong, healthy community is if, your neighbors see something wrong, they will, call the police or even confront the situation themselves. Like if you're getting robbed, they'll be like, hey, the people going in that house don't look like our neighbors. Let's check that out. Let's call the police. Or, they're seeing something wrong going in the neighborhood. So a young girl is being assaulted by a strange young black man, and you decide to go out and confront it. You would hope your neighbors would do that. That's a part of being a strong community, is that they'll put a stop to crime. They will notice nuisances. They'll alert you to these problems, and people will look out for one another. But you're not supposed to look out for one another if the suspicious person or the menace is a black person. You're just supposed to roll down your blinds, close them tightly, and look the other way. Do not get involved, because confronting that black person is a far greater crime than whatever they are doing. They could be stabbing somebody on the street, and if you go out and confront them, you could end up being, you could end up being the person stabbed. I mean, I guess that would save you from being attacked by the media. But I mean, you're going to be going to a funeral. But if you say you went out and confronted that person and shot him, well, you would end up being the person charged with a crime, or anything of that sort. You're not supposed to do anything about these crimes that happen in your community if they're committed by black people. You're just supposed to look the other way, and you're just supposed to mind your own business. Which is one of the funny things is that happening in this story is that they're in New York City and other places. They're telling people to intervene directly when they see an anti-Asian attack. Well, all these anti-Asian attacks are carried out by black people. So you're essentially telling passerbys to go up and confront a black person. And what you see in the Pentland story is that's a greater crime than whatever could be committed. Like you could see that black person wailing on an old Asian woman, and somebody goes up and says, stop that. And maybe that person's bigger, and maybe they threaten that person, and maybe they shove that person. And if all they capture is that shove of that dude who is like wailing on an old Asian lady, that person who confronted is going to be the real criminal, the real evil, the real villain, not the person assaulted. And that person can be like, I have an underlying medical condition that made me assault Asian ladies. And like, oh, we're so sorry that this happened to you. We understand that you just have to be a criminal. You're just genetically disposed to it, even though your people aren't genetically disposed to it, but you as an individual. So we just have to tolerate your behavior. And so that's like you cannot confront black people in your community if they're threatening them in any way. And we saw this in the Ahmaud Arbery story, is that this neighborhood was witnessing several break-ins. This guy, Ahmaud Arbery, matched the description. There was plenty of video evidence showing him casing the house under construction and wanting to steal material from it. He was in Timberlands. He was not in running shoes, and he was not in like baggy cargo shorts, and he was not in running gear. And as it turns out in the case, he had been using the jogger, which we all famously know Ahmaud Arbery as America's most famous jogger. But he had been using this jogger cover as a way to scope out houses he wanted to rob before. This had been alleged against him before. And, these neighbors got together. I mean, maybe they went a little overboard, but they went and chased him down to say, like, no, if you come into our neighborhood, you are going to meet, a determined citizenry who are going to let you know that we're not going to tolerate criminal behavior. And now the three guys, it's not just the father and son anymore. It's the guy who also took the video, are all facing murder charges. And so the point there is that they should have just let Ahmaud Arbery steal stuff from that property. And even that property owner, realizing that he doesn't want to be charged in this, totally threw the people who defended his property under the bus and said, "Oh, I'm totally with Ahmaud Arbery. Like, I saw him on video camera. I knew he was just, checking out the house, doing guy things. And I don't want anyone to do anything about it." So this person who is responsible for the neighborhood being on alert and being like, people are stealing stuff from my property under construction. Can you guys give a eye out for it? Now, due to the nature of our current society, says, oh, actually, no, it's okay if you come and steal stuff from my property, because I know that it's far greater consequence to be labeled a racist than it is to defend my property. Or, why than any stolen property from the house under construction. So Jonathan Pentland is learning this the hard way, that he should have just stayed inside and let the girl scream for help and him just do nothing. I mean, he could have called the police. But I mean, the police, in this case, they're like, well, we've got a lot of reports of assault from this guy, and several of the neighbors said that he was menacing the neighborhood. But the real problem is the white bully. And, this is like, I guarantee that this county sheriff is probably maybe even be a Republican. And yet he still sounds no different than Huffington Post when it comes to situations like this, because they know that the real power lies with the black mob, not with the truth or not with facts. And this just goes to show you what happens now. It's like they complain about lynch mob, but in all these cases, even with the Dante Wright shooting in Brooklyn Center, or a Minneapolis suburb, a black mob also descended on her home and were beginning threatening her, and she had to leave her home. And she was also charged with manslaughter. She was also charged with a crime. And in all these cases, they can send out a mob to threaten you and to destroy your property. And the police won't do anything. The police didn't do anything to help Jonathan Pentland. They're not going to help you if you ever do any of this stuff. Your whole life is going to be ruined if you challenge them. So you have to make a split-second decision. Are you going to be a good neighbor that your neighbors are going to throw under the bus if they're called racist? Are you going to go out of your way to help somebody if you don't even know them? Are you going to do all these things to risk your life and your livelihood? And most white people are going to be like, no, I'm just going to stay inside. I don't want to be called a racist, because there's nothing worse than being called a racist. You might as well, she could be murdered on my driveway, but no one is you're never going to lose your job for rolling down the blinds on a possible murder victim. You're just not. Even though in the case of one of these anti-Asian attacks in New York City, these two black guys who looked the other way as this black guy drop-kicked some poor old Asian lady, they did lose their jobs over it. But a lot of people were complained and defended them, because it's not their job to do that. That's the police job. And of course, they were more sympathetic towards them because they were black. I mean, if they were white guys, everyone would have called them cowards and harassed them, and everyone would have celebrated their termination. So, you have to make this risk. Do you want a nice community? I mean, you really can't have one anymore, because, you cannot confront blacks. You cannot challenge their ability to walk wherever they want and to harass and assault people and to scope out properties for robbery. And that's just the society we live in, and that's what Pentland is learning. And Pentland, by all standards, should be a model citizen. I mean, this is a drill sergeant. This is somebody who is respected by hundreds of, if not thousands of people. This is somebody who, he served his country. He put his life on the line for the country. But as soon as he defends his home, none of that matters. Like, it's, his service, his many years of service don't matter. His, him being a drill sergeant and him being a respectable member of his community and, of this country doesn't matter, because this, like, piece of trash who is going around menacing his neighborhood is more moral than him, and is superior to him just because he's black. It doesn't matter. You can be the model white person, but you are just scum underneath the shoe of a I don't know what this guy's wrong, of some mentally ill black person who continues to assault young women in your neighborhood. You are beneath them. You are at the bottom of the hierarchy. That person's at top, and you can't question that person, and you can't do anything about them. And that's what I think Pentland is maybe wanting to question what he served this country, and this is what his country does to him. And that's what happens with everybody who, a lot of these people who are serving the country. This is a lot of these people are the cream of the crop of our society. These are the type of people we want. Jonathan Pentland's in our society. We want more people to emulate his behavior. We want more people to be like him. But when you actually show that behavior in your community, in your town, and in the society that we have today, you are thrown in jail. You can't operate like that. You have to be a pussy. You have to be a coward. You just have to look the other way, not notice things. And it's a crime for noticing. The final note I want to say is that this is exactly what the elites want you to do. There was a letter to the New York Times, I think it was published in 2019, as some dopey white liberal who felt tremendous guilt for calling the cops on blacks who were stealing a car in his apartment complex. And he's like, I felt so guilty, that they were stealing a car. I could have gotten them killed. And this is so awful. I feel so terrible about this. And it's just a car. I shouldn't have done this. And the black person responded, said, you are totally justified in thinking this, that, property matters less than life. And we've seen this in the Black Lives Matter, that they've destroyed billions and billions of dollars in property. And every time they're like, well, property doesn't matter, lives do. And, there's only been a few blacks that have been killed by police. And most of them were, noble creatures who are on their way to curing cancer, as we've seen with the latest instances of Dante Wright, who had a warrant out for aggressive armed robbery. And this other case, Adam Toledo, who was Hispanic in Chicago, who was a gang member who was nicknamed Little Homicide and had a gun on him when he was shot. I mean, the case looks like it was like the cop made a split-second decision. He thought the guy was throwing his gun up to shoot at him, but he dropped it, and you only have less than a second to determine that guy could point it in your direction and you're dead, or you can shoot him and save yourself. And that looks like what the police officer made in that decision in the Adam Toledo. And once again, he's 13 years old, but he's already in gangs. He's already in the Latin Kings, and he's already accumulated the nicknames Lil Homicide and Baby Diablo. And I assume he was on his way to becoming a respectable member of society. But this is what always happens. It doesn't matter that these lives, Adam Toledo, Dante Wright, George Floyd, Jacob Blake, all these people matter far more than Jonathan Pentland and what people, what we would have seen as model members of society. No, the real models members of society are George Floyd and Dante Wright. And it doesn't matter what crimes they commit. We will believe that they are good and honorable people just because of the color of their skin. And that's really what we live in our society. All these liberal academics like to say we live in a Herrenvolk democracy and they imply that that's a white supremacist society. No, it's actually a black supremacist society where black people, just by the dint of the color of their skin, are seen as morally superior to everyone else. And then there's a hierarchy of other non-whites who are also rank high. And then whites are at the bottom, that they're evil. They have a stain by sin of the past, and they cannot overcome that. And no matter what accomplishments that they have, no matter how virtuous they are as a person, they are a worse person than the most scummy black criminal just because of the color of their skin. And that's America today, and that's unfortunately the America that Jonathan Pentland served. And so, was it worth all that service? Did he, was he paid back for all the many years he gave to this country and putting his life on the line and training people to put their life on the line? I don't think so. And then I think Darren Beatty made this point is like, you see these guys who are the people we want, and it's sad that the military exploits them and then exploits their noble natures and their masculine side and their sense of adventure for worthless deeds. And when they actually try to do something good, they're punished for it. So that is all I want to say about Jonathan Pentland. And that there's to go on to the military, and what we may be seeing now is like, what they don't want you to do is to protect your own community, to protect the border. They don't want the troops there. They want to send them overseas, and there's something to come up about that. So switching gears slightly, I mean, this is still on a military subject, is Biden announces that we're finally leaving Afghanistan on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Of course, good choice of optics, and he knows how to sell the point of when to do this. Now, this is very interesting that just last year, President Trump wanted to leave Afghanistan, but the same people who are celebrating this is like finally winding down the war. There's a great thread from Drew Holden, who's some conservative Inc. person, but these are still pretty good threads. And he's pointing out all these journalists who had said like, just a year ago, they were criticizing Trump for wanting to pull out the troops, or even not even just a year ago, just a few months ago in like January, we're criticizing Trump for wanting to pull out the troops. And now they're like, thank you, Biden, for defying the generals and pulling out the troops. It's, totally, these people have no serious opinions. They have no memory. They have no awareness. They'll just follow whatever the Democratic Party gives them, and then they shill it out. They're just propagandists. These people are not journalists. They're just stenographers that are given a script by their Democratic masters and the deep state, and that's what they go off of. But it is one, there's a lot to notice here with Biden pulling out the troops. Well, that's one of the big ones, is that journalists and liberals have completely flipped the script on what they were saying just a few months ago, and are now saying, oh, this is a great idea. I think it's also one thing that I pointed out is that I think the deep state itself is supportive of this, which they were, doing everything possible to undermine Trump's efforts to pull us out. They were making up these stories, such as the Russian bounty story, which was claiming that Russians were paying Taliban to kill U.S. troops. And this was a massive story last summer. And this, you had the whole media complex behind the story, essentially saying that Trump is a Putin pawn, that he is allied with Putin, and he wants to get American troops killed. And we have to stay there because Russia is trying to get our troops killed with these bounties. And there are several political ads cut to, attack Trump about this. Well, now, these same media outlets that were, promoting this libel are now walking it back and like, oh, this appears that the deep state exaggerated this story a little bit, just a little bit. And so we're walking it back, and many of these outlets that are like, oh, yeah, I can't believe anyone believed this, are the people who believe this. And they cried bloody murder and were waving the bloody flag of, Russia-phobia in order to keep America there. And now they're walking it back. But the fact that the deep state is walking it back shows that I think that they're in simpatico with the Biden administration on this. They've decided that Afghanistan is worthless and it's better to send our troops elsewhere. And I think really where they want to send our troops is to Ukraine and to Eastern Europe, and to places where Russia is actively involved in. I don't think Russia is that actively involved in Afghanistan. The real reason, one of the main reasons they kept Trump in Afghanistan for so long is they convinced Trump that China was going to move in and steal the minerals, and they had to stay there to keep the minerals. But based on past Afghanistan's past history of countries occupying it, like, we should let China try to occupy, because it has never worked for any country that has tried to do it. So, good luck, China. Hope you find the minerals. I'm sure they'll find much more than that. But I think they really want to move to Ukraine. I mean, Biden gave a huge speech yesterday calling for more sanctions of Russia, emphasizing Russia is the greatest geopolitical threat. This is what we're supposed to be worried about, is Russia. And Russophobia is a core tenet of the globalist ideology is that, it wouldn't have been the case maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but the real geopolitical enemy is Russia. One, they make a much more convenient threat than China. For one, we're not economically dependent on China, or we're not economically dependent on Russia like we are with China. That's for one. Our corporations aren't like desperately kowtowing before Putin. We're not trying to send our factories to Russia for cheap labor purposes. There's not this corporate interdependence that we have with Russia. And the second big reason is Russia is white, or largely white, and China is not. And it's much easier to have a villain that's white than is non-white. As you can see, when coronavirus broke out and they decided that we can't even mention that it's from China, even saying it's from China is racist, and Biden issued an executive order declaring that calling it Wuhan flu or anything like that is racist, and we're totally banning that from the federal government. So we can't even say that a virus that originated from China. That's how much of a, we can't really have a Cold War with them. But we can have one, or at least a phony one with Russia. And they feel that Russia is a weak threat, and, it's not as much of a threat as China. It's not as risky to challenge Russia as it is to challenge China. And Ukraine is probably going to flare up into another conflict now. Russia is amassing troops and vehicles along the border. Ukraine is mobilizing its forces, and they're probably going to be fighting over the Donbass in eastern Ukraine, probably maybe even next week, and probably very soon, probably sometime this month. And even though Biden wants to focus that effort there, then they maybe want to put those troops there, or move them to Syria, where Russia is heavily involved in. So I don't think this is necessarily a case of Biden wanting to, draw down our troop deployment. I think he just wants to redirect it to other places. And even though America canceled its naval deployment into the Black Sea, which is, a weak move, I think they still want to saber rattle against Russia, and they will try to still do this stuff. But I want to say is that, like, the canceling of the naval deployment to the Black Sea, it is important, because it does show when, the cards are down, when it's the time to act. Biden doesn't necessarily want to get in a war. They want to just act like they want a war, but when it's actually comes time to it, they're like, I don't think the American public wants World War III, and it's empty posturing. They only want to attack Russia in a way that doesn't risk war, and doesn't risk a serious conflict where America may be embarrassed or severely harmed by it. And that's why I think, they'll have troop deployments to Ukraine, but they will never use them. And they'll never, and actually if Russia did attack parts where troops were deployed, I could see us very well retreating, because we'll blink. When Russia challenges us, we're not going to actually go down and fight. I think we want to have these proxy wars where we're not necessarily directly fighting Russia, but we're fighting their allies. So I could see us, directing more of an interventionist spirit in Syria, where, there's only just, a couple hundred Russian special forces and other people like that there. And we would just, take out Assad as a proxy for Russia in our conflict with Russia. But when it came to directly challenging Russia, say in the Ukraine or elsewhere in Eastern Europe, I don't think we would do it. I don't think actually taking the risk of going into conflict versus boasting about it. I don't think the Biden administration or anyone in government really has the desire to do it. I think some people in the military may want it, because the military definitely wants a war with Iran. But I think they're much more worried about a war with Russia, because I don't think it would be an easy victory. And there could be some very bad things could happen with America and its empire. So, it's good that, to return to the original point, it is good that we're withdrawing from Afghanistan. I could still see, the deep state or the Pentagon throwing some curveballs. The Pentagon still wants to stay there. But the intelligence agencies walking back the Russian bounty claims. I think really, if they really wanted to keep us there, these journalists are totally bought hook and sinker with the deep state. I mean, the CIA could just call up one of these reporters like, oh yeah, the Russian bounty story, it's totally true. They're actually doubling the amount they're giving for American bounties to ensure that we'll stay there. But the fact that they're walking it back shows that they're assenting to Biden's withdrawal. Maybe they realize that it's good for the Democratic Party to have this. Maybe they're thinking about political considerations and that they trust the Democratic Party more than the Republican Party, and they want to keep the Democratic Party in power and to help Biden, increase his support among the American people. Or maybe they just think it's a waste of time and they should be focused more on their resources on Russia. Or it could be a combination of both. I think the Pentagon doesn't like any drawdown. I mean, they could be they could be posted anywhere in the world and they would demand to stay there because that means more money for them and more resources for the Pentagon. So it's something to keep an eye on. I do think I am skeptical about it. I do support it because there's no point. We should have left Afghanistan a long time ago. But it's good that we're finally leaving. But I don't think that this makes Biden a non-interventionist. I think we're going to see ourselves get involved in another conflict. It could be in Syria, could be in Yemen, could be somewhere in Africa, could be in Ukraine, could be even somewhere in Southeast Asia. You never know where we could end up. They're saber rattling about Myanmar. Maybe we could end up there. I think Biden is just doing what Trump wanted to do, but the institutions were opposed to Trump, and I think Biden has the benefit of having the institutions totally on his side. So that's something to keep in mind the next time we want to pull out of somewhere. Before we move on to our final topic, I want to make a quick point about how the media and big tech and all these institutions are on the same side. We're really seeing this with what happened with the latest bout of tech censorship that occurred just yesterday. First, Facebook blocked sharing of the story exposing one of the BLM founders for having $1 million homes. You're not allowed to share that anymore on Facebook because apparently it reveals personal information. This comes at the same time that pretty much everyone can share the home address of Jonathan Pentland and be like, oh, go here, we're going to harass him and destroy his property. And there's been many cases of them showing where people's property are. I mean, from celebrities to politicians onward. There are so many home addresses that are leaked to on Facebook. And this is just using a stupid reason. They're claiming that this is like a private person where they're using this to harass. Nobody even gave out the address. They just showed the home and the area. And there's no reason that a public figure should avoid this type of scrutiny. But Facebook, which is allied with Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives Matter, of course, is supported by the deep state, as noticed by when the FBI agents all took a knee during the Black Lives Matter protests last summer, and advocated by all these CIA officials saying they stand with Black Lives Matter, and the Biden administration as well saying they stand with Black Lives Matter. That this shows that they're one and the same with the status quo. They are the establishment. Black Lives Matter is not an insurrection. It's the establishment fighting it back against the people. It's sanctioned by the system, and I don't think you need any better example of that than Facebook blocking objective journalism from the New York Post about one of their founders' $1 million homes. You don't need any better example of that. And the reasons are totally stupid. The second is Twitter banned James O'Keefe and Project Veritas for exposing CNN. And they once again, and Twitter, just like Facebook, used stupid reasons. They're saying, oh, we used a fake account. And this is clearly that aside that they exposed one of the main establishments of this establishment nexus, and they embarrassed them, and they showed that they're totally partisan and that they're totally committed to attacking Republicans and officials they deem a threat. And due to that offense, they suspended James O'Keefe, and they said, oh, he's running a fake account. What fake account? There is no fake account involved. They just made up something because CNN demanded that they ban James O'Keefe, similar to how Black Lives Matter demanded that Facebook block the story and Twitter followed the directives. So this is the kind of country that we now live in, is that Black Lives Matter, CNN, and other institutions can silence opinion, silence free speech, and stifle ordinary journalism if it benefits their interests. And big tech will find any reason to support it. And yeah, that's the type of power they wield. And I said this is like dystopia is here, and it's even lamer than we could imagine. Like you would imagine that you have cool like SWAT team and like this cool body armor coming and raiding your home. No, it's Facebook saying you can't share a story because it offends some fat Black Lives Matter lesbian who owns like homes that are worth over $3 million. So that's the world we live in. But moving on to another story. I mean, some of these topics are a little, grim. Hopefully people aren't black pilled. I think I do want to make a point. It's like you should stay white pilled. Is that you see all this chaos going on. Things are moving in our direction, but they're at the same time that the system gets wackier and there's more chaos, etc. I think you should realize that more people are waking up to this, and it's cliche, but it's always darkest before the dawn. Things have to move in this direction in order for things to get better. And yes, things are going to get crazier and more ridiculous, but don't give up hope. Don't just throw up your hands and just like, everything is hopeless. It's not. But we are moving to something that is going to further maybe some of the hopeless mindset of some people. And this comes from a Republican governor in Utah. The governor of Utah, Spencer J. Cox, he defended the Utah Jazz excluding white kids from their scholarship program. He said a young Utah boy asked the governor if it's racist that the Utah Jazz exclude white children from the team scholarship program. Spencer Cox said it's not racist. Ryan Smith and the Jazz can do what they want with their funds. All kids should have equal opportunities, and we're proud of the Jazz. So apparently, equal opportunities means white people not having the opportunity at all. And he also used the this private sphere argument that like, it's a private corporation. They can do whatever they want with their money. And Zaid Jilani, who is this like goofy, lame, nuanced leftist who I think I've said this in the podcast before, but if you see a right winger who is positively interacting with Zaid Jilani, that's a major red flag, because you should it's a genuine good right winger if they're not interacting with Zaid Jilani. If they're all over Zaid Jilani and having these like cutesy little conversations with them, they're fake. They're not someone to trust. That's a good rule of thumb in my book. But he said there's a difference between private and public scholarships. But no, as I made this point, and yes, people are always like saying, well, imagine if it's the different scenario. And yes, it's done the cliche, but yeah, no one would make this argument if it was a whites only scholarship. And some people, I think some right wingers, if you ever even mention this like hypocrisy angle, no matter what the context, they get up in the arms that you even use this. I had a few Wignats who are in my comments who are like, "You're fake news, controlled opposition. Don't say that. Just yell white power when people do that." And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure that's going to work. Libtards are going to be totally defeated if you just yell white power at them. But this is how some of these people think. But moving back to Spencer Cox, is that this is an outrageous proposal that some Republican would even say this. Like you would have to say is that it was a mandatory belief for you like 20, 30 years ago to oppose affirmative action to be a Republican. Now, not only do these Republicans support affirmative action, they support racial exclusion and racial segregation when it comes to public benefits or private benefits in this scenario. And Spencer Cox is maybe one of the worst Republicans out there. He cut a horrible ad with his Democratic opponent last year, and both of them were Mormons and goofy guys. Probably both closet cases. When you watch videos of Spencer Cox and like pictures of him, and you get strong closet case energy from him. There's even a story I tweeted out about his love of the Utah Jazz, and he's sitting kneeling, and he's got a soy jack. He's bald too, so it really makes the soy jack impression stronger. And he's got his mouth agape, going like, "Yay! I love the Utah Jazz," and he's just like all about this. And this is the person they put in charge of the Mormons put in charge of their state. and this is somebody who will like totally support racial exclusion if it's his favorite sports team doing it. And there's not much of resistance towards it. I would think most Republicans would oppose this. They say like, I oppose racism and blah blah blah, I believe in Martin Luther King. They'll use some cringe argument, but they would probably oppose this. Spencer Cox wouldn't do that, and he's all about civility. He constantly criticized Trump. I have a few examples of a lot of the cringe he's supported over the few years. In 2019, he celebrated his birthday by raising nearly $10,000 for refugees. He said, "This is what makes Utah so unique and why our state continues to enjoy widespread success. Government wasn't designed to solve every problem. It was designed on the premise that business, nonprofit, and faith-based organizations would lead out to improve communities." That same year, he also demanded that other Republicans call out Trump's racist tweets because there's a better way to respond to Trump's racism than no comment. This is how he ran as governor. The cringe just continues on. And this is a tweet from 2018, is that he said quote, "Can't sleep tonight. I know I shouldn't tweet, but I'm angry and sad. I hate what we've become. My wife wants to go and hold babies and read to lonely, scared, sad kids. I want to punch somebody. Political tribalism is stupid. It sucks and it's dangerous, and we are all part of the problem." This thread continues. "Some of my party are doing and supporting things I never thought possible. You won't believe me, but your party is capable of it too. We've got what we deserve. If we want change, we have to change ourselves. Turn off cable news forever. Get off Facebook. At least stop political posts. Ask, how would I react if the other party did this before forming an opinion? Get to know, listen to, and love someone different. Elect people that don't care about getting reelected. Run for office." The blah, 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 spirit of liberty quote, and then being a good Samaritan. And then he's like, and then he ended with, "I know I'm breaking the never tweet when angry, tired rules. I'll probably delete by morning. Don't at me. Hopefully I can sleep now." Of course, this was tweeted out in June 20th, 2018, so he never deleted. And this was post about the initial outrage over Trump's kids in cages that occurred. That was a big story in the summer of 2018. And of course, Biden keeps the kids in cages, are migrant shelters, as they call them now. And no similar level discourse. And this is just so pathetic. I mean, you could say this is a Mormon problem. I think in some ways that maybe it is that Utah is a largely homogenous state, largely white, where there's not a lot of the problems that we see in other states due to being more homogenous and more white than any other states. So they're able to get away with this type of goofiness and this like, why don't we just all get along and love all these immigrant babies and donate to refugees? And it's very bad. And Spencer Cox is always upheld as like a good Republican by the media and never Trumpers. And he's really just terrible. I mean, I said this is like his commitment to civility, which is what his number one concern is, means accepting anti-white racism. Anti-white racism is now a facet of elite culture and elite society. And it's what the right people accept. They accept white privilege. They accept that white people are inherently worse than others, than all the other races, and that we're a nation built upon white supremacy. As our UN ambassador said this week, is that white supremacy is interwoven into our founding documents. It's a fundamental feature of our society. And worded in a different way that could be based, but she did not mean it in a based way. So this is what commitment to civility means. It means accepting scholarships that whites are excluded from. It means accepting that whites are going to be taught to feel shame for themselves. It means accepting that whites are going to be rejected from jobs and college applications because of the color of their skin. Anti-white racism is a part of civility now, and Spencer Cox is showing that with his statement. And that's why civility is stupid and is a concept that we should no longer abide by. I mean, it doesn't mean like you should start cussing people out, etc., but it means the general sense of civility is that the other side has good points, and they're Americans too, and we should all work together to common solutions, and all these solutions, common solutions, bipartisan ideas are about destroying the historic American nation, about ensuring that we send more of our soldiers overseas to fight some stupid war for the globalist empire. And that's bipartisanship. Bipartisanship is amnesty, endless wars, and criminal justice reform that leaves criminals to run free and prey on the innocent. And we should oppose that, and we should see Spencer Cox as an enemy, as that we do not want our officials to act like this. And hopefully he goes on Tucker and answers for his many offenses. So on that note, I want to finish up. We're not having Patreon questions this week because I'm going to save them up for next week. There'll probably be a lot more happening next week. I don't know when I'll be recording because I may wait until there's a verdict in the Chauvin case, which I think should be early next week, but we'll see. And of course, if you have any questions, suggestions, guests you would like to see on, make sure you sign up for the highly respected Patreon at patreon.com/highly respected. So until next time, stay respected.